Wednesday's episode of Days of Our Lives may look lighter on the surface. A date, a trivia night, a sweet reunion, a tense confrontation, and a threat. But the deeper you look, the more this episode feels like one of those deceptively important Salem chapters where several storylines quietly shift at the same time. Because this is not just an hour about people socializing. It is an hour about chemistry being tested, loyalties being strained, and emotional fault lines becoming harder to ignore. So while Wednesday may not be built around one giant shock, it may still be one of the week's most important episodes. Because in Salem, the biggest changes do not always begin with an explosion. Sometimes they begin with a night out, one uncomfortable question, or a confrontation that suddenly turns personal. Let's start with Gabby and Philip, because their night out may be doing more than simply giving them a pleasant scene together. At first glance, this looks easy to read. Two people spend time together, enjoy the evening, and continue building a connection. But in a soap, a date like this is rarely important because of what is said out loud. It becomes important because of what it suggests about direction. The show may be asking whether this is still a temporary pairing, or whether it is starting to harden into something with real emotional weight. Gabby is not the kind of character who casually drifts into attachment. If she keeps making room for Philip, there is usually a reason. It could be attraction, it could be comfort, it could be the appeal of someone who feels more stable than the chaos around her. And with Gabby, those things often overlap with instinct and self-protection. She can move towards someone because she wants them, because she trusts them, or because she recognizes that they may fit into her life in a way that is unexpectedly useful. Philip, meanwhile, may be gaining something important simply by being consistent. He does not need a huge romantic gesture to matter. If he becomes the person Gabby can relax around, the person who feels easy to be with, then this relationship could start deepening in a way that feels natural rather than forced. And those are often the most dangerous connections in Salem, the ones that do not arrive like a fantasy, but slowly become difficult to dismiss. So this date may not look explosive on the surface, but it could be the kind of scene that quietly changes how the audience is meant to see them, not as a passing flirtation, but as a pairing that may soon complicate a lot more than either of them expects. From there, the episode opens out into trivia night at the pub, where Theo, Jada, Gabby, Philip, and others come together in what appears to be one of the week's more relaxed settings. And that relaxed energy may be exactly what makes the scene useful. Soap operas often hide important movement inside social events. A trivia night sounds harmless, even playful. It gives characters a reason to gather without immediately forcing conflict. But that kind of setting can be incredibly effective, because it allows the show to shift dynamics in quieter ways. Chemistry can sharpen, distance can become visible, comfort can start to feel intimate. A simple exchange across a table can sometimes say more than a major confrontation. If Gabby and Philip are there together, the group atmosphere may help show whether their connection holds up naturally in public, not just in more private or controlled moments. If Theo and Jada are part of the mix, the show may also be using the event to keep their emotional presence active while larger storylines continue building around them. A setting like this lets the audience observe who seems aligned, who seems awkward, and who seems to be drifting into a more comfortable rhythm without needing to announce it. And that kind of emotional positioning often matters later. Because Salem rarely stays light for long. Even in a fun setting, tension tends to travel with the characters. Romantic uncertainty does not disappear just because people are laughing. Secrets do not stop mattering because the environment feels warm. In fact, those contrasts often make the storytelling stronger. The scene can feel easy on the surface while still planting the emotional groundwork for harder turns ahead. So trivia night may not be there just to entertain. It may be there to subtly rearrange the emotional map before the bigger fallout begins. One of Wednesday's gentler beats is Leo reuniting with Trey, and that softness may be exactly what gives the scene its impact. Leo is usually a character wrapped in performance. He uses humor, flair, and emotional deflection almost as armor. He knows how to control attention. He knows how to keep situations lively enough that nobody lingers too long on what is hurting underneath. So when the show gives him a reunion grounded in warmth rather than chaos, it tends to reveal something more vulnerable than usual. On the surface, the scene may simply feel heartfelt. Trey may bring Leo something rare in his current world. Affection without complication, connection without games, warmth without instability. And that alone gives the reunion emotional value. But the deeper strength of the scene may come from contrast. The more genuine this moment feels, the more sharply it may highlight how bruised Leo's other relationships have become. That contrast can do a lot of work very quickly. Because Leo is already carrying disappointment, insecurity, and romantic confusion into this week. He is trying to fix things with Javi while the possibility of losing that connection seems to be growing more real. So if Trey brings him a moment of uncomplicated comfort, the audience may start to feel the gap between the kind of emotional safety Leo actually needs and the kind of emotional chaos he keeps chasing. And that is where the scene becomes more than just sweet. It starts to frame Leo in a different light, not simply as a dramatic figure caught in romantic mess, but as someone who may be quietly craving sincerity more than he wants to admit. That is a much more revealing version of the character. So this reunion may offer comfort, yes. But it may also deepen the sadness around Leo's week by showing how much steadier his life could feel if his emotional world were not so full of damage, confusion, and people slipping out of reach. Then there is Johnny and Chanel, and their Wednesday material may be more important than the spoiler first suggests. Chanel catches Johnny off guard, and that detail immediately tells us this scene is probably not about casual conversation. It suggests Chanel is walking into the moment with sharper awareness than Johnny expects. She may have noticed a change in him, sensed emotional distance, or simply reached the point where staying quiet no longer feels possible. And when one person in a marriage starts asking the question the other person is not ready for, the imbalance becomes very revealing. Because this may not just be about one awkward reaction from Johnny. It may be about Chanel realizing that whatever he is carrying is no longer staying contained inside work, family, or Demera politics. It is starting to show up in the relationship itself. Stress connected to power, responsibility, or loyalty can remain external for a while, but once it begins affecting how two people talk, respond, or withhold from each other, the emotional stakes change completely. And Johnny may already be at that point. If he is under pressure from Demera Enterprises, from EJ's orbit, or from larger tensions surrounding the family, then being caught off guard by Chanel could expose how thin his emotional control is becoming. Sometimes the most telling scenes are not the loudest ones. They are the ones where a character fails to hide strain at the exact moment someone close to them finally sees through the performance. Because a marriage can survive outside chaos as long as both people still feel like they are protecting the same center. But once Chanel starts pushing for clarity while Johnny starts reacting defensively, the tone changes. One person is now seeking truth. The other is trying to contain fallout. That creates a subtle but dangerous shift in power inside the relationship. So Wednesday may not bring a dramatic collapse for Johnny and Chanel. But it could show that the pressure surrounding Johnny is no longer circling the marriage from the outside. It may already be inside the room with them, and that is usually when the real damage begins. And finally, there is Gwen and Dmitri, which may bring Wednesday's harshest energy by far. Gwen threatens Dmitri, and that alone tells us this conflict is moving into a more dangerous phase. This no longer sounds like bitterness simmering under the surface or legal frustration waiting to be negotiated. It sounds like Gwen has reached the point where restraint no longer feels useful. When a character like Gwen stops trying to manage the situation and starts openly pushing back, the fight usually becomes much uglier very quickly. Because Dmitri is not the kind of opponent who gets rattled easily. He is manipulative, proud, and often most effective when a conflict becomes messy enough for him to exploit. He knows how to keep emotional chaos working in his favor. So if Gwen is threatening him, the scene may stop being about the original grievance almost immediately. It may become a contest over leverage, humiliation, and who gets to seize control before the other one does. And that kind of conflict rarely stays clean. The larger weekly setup already suggests Gwen may not be getting the divorce settlement she expected, which gives this confrontation even more emotional force. If she feels cheated, dismissed, or made to look powerless, then the threat may be about more than money. It may be about dignity. It may be about refusing to let Dmitri leave her carrying the damage while he walks away with the upper hand. A dispute over terms can still be solved. A fight driven by wounded pride is much harder to contain. Once both characters start protecting ego as much as outcome, the conflict expands beyond the original issue. It becomes about payback, about making the other person feel the loss, about proving that no one gets to win without being hit on the way out. And Gwen is exactly the kind of character who can make that dangerous. So Wednesday's showdown may carry real bite not simply because a threat is made, but because it feels like a turning point, the moment this battle stops being a tense dispute and starts becoming a war neither side intends to end gracefully. So overall, Wednesday, April 15th looks like one of those Days of Our Lives episodes where nearly every storyline takes a meaningful step forward, even if none of them explode all at once. Gabby and Philip may move closer to becoming something real. Trivia night may provide a lighter setting while quietly shifting several emotional dynamics in the background. Leo's reunion with Trey may bring genuine heart while reminding us how unsettled the rest of his life has become. Chanel may catch Johnny in a vulnerable moment that reveals more strain inside their marriage than either of them wants to admit. And Gwen's threat to Dmitri may push their conflict into much more dangerous territory. What makes this episode so interesting is not one giant headline moment. It is the accumulation. It is the sense that several stories are all changing direction at once. And on Days of Our Lives, those are often the episodes that matter most, because once multiple emotional lines begin to move at the same time, the bigger fallout is usually already on its way.